So yeah, thank you, DevOps Days Austin, for having me here as a speaker. Thank you for putting me in the first time slot after lunch on the last day. But really, thank you. So like you said, this is hearing and being heard, getting the entire team to speak. I'm Daniel Ward. This QR code will also be on the last slide. This just takes you to a blog post I have up where you can download or view the slides if you want to. Just so you know, if you are the type of person to take a picture of slides, you don't have to do that. You can still do it if you want, but you won't lose any information. It's all out there. So my background for this talk is I'm a consultant. And my motivation was, as a consultant, I go to different teams pretty frequently, right? And a kind of a trend I noticed with maybe every team, almost every team I've been on, has been you have one or two people who do a lot of the talking, or maybe all the talking in meetings, and then another one or two people who are very quiet, hardly do any talking, or maybe no talking at all. And I just thought this was kind of interesting. I said, does this matter? I'm kind of looking for ways to improve teams a lot. Is this just how humans work when they're in a group and it's not a problem, or does it affect stuff? So I started kind of researching this a little bit. And what I found and the things I've tried are all going to be what this talk is about. And I've kind of divvied this up into two sections here. The first one is, does it matter? I'm kind of going over the research that I found. And then what can we do is going to be really like the main section of this presentation. And it's really just my experience. It's stuff that I've tried, people have advised me to do, and what I think has worked well for me in the past. Real quick about me, I'm a software developer background, and I'm also now a consultant for this company called Lean Techniques based in Des Moines, Iowa. So I live in San Antonio. I work fully remote, obviously. I'm a Microsoft MVP in .NET, and I co-organize the San Antonio and Austin .NET user group. So are there any .NET people here? There's dozens of us in the area. So if you're into that, come to this. We've got a meeting at the end of this month. We've got a JetBrains speaker coming, so that'll be fun. And you can find me online at these places. My blog, danandacan.com. That's where you'll find these slides. And there's my socials. So please hit me up if you enjoyed this talk. If you have feedback, would love to meet people who found me from this. So first section, does it matter? So when I started researching, what I found was this research from someone named Anita Woolley and her team around 2007, 2008, so it's actually been around for a while. They said, we have this thing called IQ for individuals to measure how they'll perform across lots of different kinds of tasks. And it works pretty well. Do we have that same thing for groups of people? Is there like a group IQ we can measure? And they found that there is, and they called this thing collective intelligence, and that there's really only three main factors that predict basically how well a group will perform together on lots of different kinds of tasks. So before I go into those really quick, what are not main factors are basically anything to do with IQ. Individual IQ, the highest IQ on the team, the IQ of the leader on the team, whoever that is, none of that really matters. I just want to get that out of the way because that's kind of what I jump to. I think that's kind of the intuition. That sounds intuitive, that IQ of the team, the individual IQ should matter. And the truth is, they just don't really. They don't affect it that much. So, okay, three main factors. First one is this thing they call social sensitivity. This really just means your ability to look at somebody's face, and from that, you can make accurate predictions about what that person is thinking and feeling. So very like social skills, empathy related. And this is how they measured it, this test called reading the mind and the eyes. So here's an example. They take a bunch of cutouts of a face, and then they have several emotions, and you try to guess which emotion you think this face is conveying. So this is a real one from the test. Don't say it out loud. Let's try this one. Think to yourself, which of these four emotions do you think this face is conveying? Just think to yourself for a moment. All right, got it? Okay, so this one is actually playful. So if you got it wrong, don't worry. It just means you lack empathy. But this is actually one of the harder ones on the test. And something that I think is super interesting, they also ran remote versions of this study where people couldn't see each other. And this test still mattered just as much. So they test it with, you're looking at faces, but it's really pointed to some deeper trait we have of some kind of social skills, right? The second thing is something they call distribution of conversational turn-taking. And that's a lot of words. All it really means is balanced conversation is better. So they found that when conversation was dominated by one or two people, the collective intelligence of the group went down for that. And when it was more evenly distributed, the collective intelligence was higher and the group performs better. So the last third thing, definitely the least controversial one I have on here, is the number of women on the team. So they found generally the more women that were on the team, the higher the collective intelligence of the group was. And they said, we don't really know why. And actually, when it's all women, it goes back down to average. The highest was all women and one man, I think. And they said, we're not completely sure why. It is something we saw consistently. A large part of that is because women, on average, are more socially sensitive than men. But yeah, that was the third thing. And we're going to focus on those first two because those are really the things we can influence on our teams immediately, right? Having balanced conversation and like being empathetic, being socially sensitive to one another. Okay, so this what can we do section, I'm considering like the meat and potatoes of this. The last part was scientific. I want to stress that don't consider this next part scientific. These are not like scientific experiments I've done. These are just things that I have tried from my experience that I think work well. And even the people you work with, some of these might work well and some of them might not. It's, it doesn't mean you can't get to know the person still. So I would like to do a quick comparison before I get into that stuff between quiet people and talkative people. I think in general, quiet people are going to be newer to the team or newer to the career as a whole, right? They're still learning stuff, and that's fine. They just don't want to be in that phase forever, maybe a few months, right? And something you can try, like sometimes the obvious answer is the best one, you can just ask them directly to talk more. This is actually what happened with me. I was in a retro, and the person facilitating, she said it in a really kind way. She was like, hey, there's 2 or 3 of you on the team who we don't hear from that much, and we'd like to. So our response was like, I didn't even know that. I hadn't thought of it. My brain just doesn't work that way, but I don't mind making an effort to consciously talk more. And it worked out. So sometimes it's just because they haven't had the thought yet, right? They might not think the same as you. This is kind of a harder one. Sometimes they're not happy in their current role, right? That might be because the job description wasn't accurate. It might be because they're new to the career and it's just not what they thought it was. But long story short, it's hard, but sometimes it's better in the long run for everybody involved if they transition to a different team or something or a different role. Well, they'll be better long term. And you can definitely have too many cooks in the kitchen if you've heard of 2 pizza teams. Basically, the idea, your team should be able to be fed by 2 pizzas. If you need more than that, your team's too big. So to get specific, in my experience, anything more than like 5 or 6 individual contributors, and the team's going to start just like naturally dividing themselves because it's too big. So if you have like 10 devs on a team, you're never going to get balanced conversation. It's just not going to happen. So team size. Now, on the talkative side, by comparison, these are probably more the experts. They've been on the team or the company or the career like a long time. And the caveat to that, right, is they might have siloed that knowledge. They might talk a lot because they're literally the only person at the company who knows about that thing. So if that's the case, you need to do some kind of knowledge sharing or something. This is something I've done where you talk just to like fill that void, sometimes void of silence. But also when I've been on the more quiet side, which I think is where I naturally lean, what I would think to myself is, I'm going to wait a few seconds to see if somebody else has something to say first, and then if nobody says, I'll bring it up. But I don't want to interrupt anybody. So sometimes if you just give it like 3 or 4 seconds, which does feel really long in the moment, then someone you might not expect will speak up if you haven't tried that yet. And then I've also kind of swung too far in the other direction sometimes and been the talkative one. And this is something someone suggested to me that I think has worked, is this only works, I guess, on like Zoom calls or Teams when you're actually on a call, but you can mute yourself. And then just the act of like having to move over to the unmute button and clicking it kind of makes you think to yourself, like, is this worth it right now? Can it wait a few seconds? It just makes you more conscious of it. Okay, the rest of this presentation is just going to be kind of one thing after the other things you can try. So the first one I like to call cheating it with meeting formats because you don't really have to do anything except like maybe tweak how you do your meetings a little bit, and just by doing that, you get better participation. So the first one is just ask more specific questions. Don't ask really general stuff. So an example of this, I was with a team recently doing a team norms meeting, And what I did not ask them was, what do you want on your team norms? I asked them stuff like, how do you want to handle pairing? And what's our strategy for doing automated tests? And what's the on-call rotation protocol? And it's just not how the human brain works to have no constraints with creative thinking. If you think about like art or something, usually you need some kind of constraint, and you'll get creative juices flowing better. It's just generally how people work. Silent sorting, this is one I really like. You can do this remotely or in person, but you need some kind of post-it note. So it's really when you need to categorize anything. Maybe you're pointing stuff, maybe you're moving stuff into different categories. But basically you say, okay, here's all our post-its and here's the categories on the board. You have 3 minutes, no talking, just move the post-its where you think they belong. And those are the only rules. So inevitably what happens when you do this is like 80% of these get picked up, dropped, and then never touched again. And then like the last 10 or 20% or so will get picked up, moved, someone else will pick it up and move it again, and it keeps going. And just kind of by definition, those are the tickets that need to be talked about, because they're the ones people have disagreements over. So I like that because you say no talking, so it's faster, number one, than having a verbal conversation. Number two, it automatically puts everybody on the same communication level, right? Because the quiet people are going to be quiet anyway, but they have the same communication here as the whole team. Non-anonymous cards. What I mean by this is, let's say you're doing retro on Miro or Trello or something, and when someone makes a card, I think there's a setting you can say it puts their name on it when they create it. And you don't have to do that. So what happened with a team I was on once is we had one person who was particularly quiet, and he would basically like never create cards and stuff during retro. And this little change we made once is that now when you create a ticket, it puts your name on it. So we know who to call on to talk about it. And we didn't even say anything after that. But he started putting stuff on the board after that, and I think it was because like this self-imposed social pressure, right? Like, oh crap, that everyone can see I'm not putting stuff on the board. Maybe I should do 1 or 2 a week or something. And just by doing that, you can get some more even participation. And finally, just don't do the exact same meeting format with retro or whatever every single week. I think when people know what to expect, they don't have to prepare as much, and it just becomes routine instead of like actually thinking about stuff. A resource here is retromat.org that I like. It just gives you a different retro format every time you load the page to just kind of give you ideas. So here's an example of one. This is the inside of my fridge, which, as I learned, is a like very personal thing for some people. But this is one we did where the person facilitating the retro just got all of our fridge pictures beforehand, and then she showed a slideshow. And we just had to vote on who we thought owned the fridge. And it was just like this fun way to start the meeting that got everybody engaged and paying attention at the start. And not like everything has to be super about work. You know, it's okay to just have fun sometimes. Okay. Outside influences, sometimes how people act is not a result of directly the team or even themselves, right? It's like stuff the org has imposed on them. So we're probably all familiar with stuff like burnout, too many tickets, too short deadlines, people shut down, too many meetings, right? If you're in meetings 4 hours out of an 8-hour day, you're probably not going to talk a whole lot. That makes sense. Kind of the converse of that I think not that many people know about is bore out. So it's the same effect. You just kind of shut down. But the cause is kind of the opposite. It's like, I don't get engaging work. So a lot of this is like, I don't own the work. It just gets passed down, don't ask questions, don't work the customer, just kind of mundane. That will also make people shut down. Kind of what I said before with the more quiet and the newer people, sometimes this is a problem with the whole interview and hiring process, that maybe you didn't interview well enough, or maybe the job description wasn't accurate, and that has like huge implications all the way down the line. I would highly recommend, it doesn't matter what kind of company you're in, you really nail the hiring process down, because that affects literally everything else in the company. And finally, culture of competition, or like competitive workplaces. This was part of their research too, and they actually found that these, like the self-imposed competition from above does lower collective intelligence. Competition in general is not necessarily bad. If it's self-imposed from the team and they're just like doing it for funsies, then it can be okay. An example is I had some friends who were on a team and they were doing test-driven development, so red, green, or factor, and they were just trying to see how fast they could get the loop between passing the driver, and I think they got it down to 30 seconds or something. And that's an example where the competition ended up producing better quality code, but nobody got hurt. There weren't really any stakes. So just having competition isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's top-down imposed. Jellyfish rule. This is another one I really like. So it's basically someone's in a meeting and they go off on a tangent, or they go way too detailed explanation, or it's just not what the meeting is about, and you want to say, like, hey, dude, shut up. We have 10 minutes left, whatever. And so the idea is anyone can say like a safe word like jellyfish. And it means the same thing, but when it's this safe word like this, everyone knows it means the same thing, but it just doesn't make them as mad, right? So it's kind of good for three reasons. Like it's safe. It just feels better. It's accessible, so like anybody on the team can do this. It's not just the team lead or who's facilitating the meeting. And because anyone on the team can do it, it kind of raises awareness for everybody. It's like, oh crap, I'm going to get jellyfished. I need to stop. Everybody kind of has that in the back of their mind. Now that does mean you have to talk about it beforehand, and everyone has to agree on it. You can't just like go into meetings and start shouting jellyfish at people. But you can also choose whatever word you want, right? It doesn't have to be jellyfish. We were on a team, we did Elmo, because it stood for enough, let's move on. And there's tons of Elmo images you can post in the chat to go along with it. So you can just have fun with it. Well, I had a friend, and this was before COVID, they were in office. They had a dartboard, and they all had like the sticky darts, and they would shoot the little target whenever this was happening in the meeting. So mentorship, and what I mean by this is really like the informal mentorships that sort of naturally happens when someone joins the team. This probably happened to you when you started your career. Obviously, the mentee learns not just the knowledge, but like the culture. But I think the mentor gains from this as well because they get personally invested in this person's success. So it kind of makes them like pull back a little bit to try to push this person more, right? There's this thing called the curse of knowledge, which means you've become so advanced in a field or you've been advanced for so long that you no longer remember what it's like to be a beginner, so you can't teach beginners. And I think mentorship helps alleviate that. I'm going to move along here because I have a few minutes left. Cognitive diversity means differences in thinking styles. So examples are between professions. So like a lawyer will have a different thinking style from a product person, from a salesperson, from a developer. And they found that if you have all of these on the same team working together, you generally have a higher collective intelligence. Well, man, that sounds a lot like cross-functional teams. So if you can at least, even once a week, work with a UX or product person or something, I think the research kind of shows that you will actually perform better. And not only that, in my experience, it's more rewarding. It's hard to be mad at people you know personally instead of like that other team, right? And finally, pairing. This is the last slide on here for a reason, pairing or mobbing, because if you go back and look at this presentation, this addresses like literally every other slide that I've gone through. I know this can be like a controversial thing, so I don't like force teams to do this or tell them to do it all day. And I know it can be like mentally draining, and sometimes you just don't get along with people, and I get that. But pairing addresses like you have automatic mentorship with it. You get rid of knowledge silos automatically. You need less meetings because you're together all day anyway. Like you automatically get social sensitivity because you're with these people all day, right? It just kind of like without extra effort. If you just do pairing, it kind of addresses all of this stuff. The suggested reading things, these are just stuff I use in this presentation. If you go to these slides later and you're curious, you can Google or go to these links. So that's it. Here's that QR code again, and I'll take questions up here or if you want to come up here afterwards. So thank you.